Okay, class. The last video that I created, I tried to show you how to set up virtual machines in our cluster. The problem is we can't host virtual machines on our virtual machines. So I'm going to show you a little bit about the file manager, network file shares on a cluster. So what I'm going to do, I have DC DNS started. I have the iSCSI server started, FOC1 and FOC2. If you're having any issues, you might want to start off by rebooting the DC, rebooting it, let it come fully up, rebooting your iSCSI server. Then once that's fully up, reboot the two FOCs. If you're getting this, I'm, I'm on FOC1 currently. I went into the Failover Cluster Manager under Tools. So if you get this error is probably because I just rebooted. If you go to the errors and you can just reset so you don't see those errors. If this is up and running, you don't get errors like that. Every time you shut it down, you get all kind of errors. But I can see that currently I'm hosting the DHCP role. Both my nodes are up. I have 3 disks added to the cluster, one being used for the quorum witness disk, one's being used by DHCP, and then we have the shared clustered shared volume that's attached to both machines. And is accessible on the C drive under the cluster storage, then volume 1. So that's our clustered shared volume. That's where it gets mounted to. Basically, one machine will mount the disk, then share it as the clustered shared volume. So what the first thing we need to do to deal with anything as far as file shares in a cluster, we need to install add roles and features. I'm going to do this on FOC1 first. We need to install the file service roles. Once you have it installed, click Next, Next, Restart if needed, then Install. I'm going to do the same thing to FOC2. I could have done it on the same machine, but I'm not going to just because I don't want to wait till the first one's installed. I can actually install this while the other one is installing rather. Again, I'm going to go to Manage, Add Roles and Features. I'm going to choose FOC2. Expand File and Storage Services, expand File and iSCSI Services, and choose File Manager. Then Install. I'm getting an error saying I need to change my password. I have to change my password every 30 or 45 days. I can't remember what. So I'm just going to sign into my DC and just reset my password. That will give me another 45 days. I'm going to go to Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers. If I change my password the normal way, I can't use the same password. But if I do it this way, I can reuse the same password. I wouldn't do this in a production environment, but for this lab, it's fine. Under the user container, I'm going to right-click Administrator and Reset Password. I'm not going to make the user change it. By doing it this way, I wasn't asked for the old password, and it will just allow you to reset it to whatever you want. So I'm going to back to FOC1. I can see that the file server service is installed. I'm going to do the same to FOC2. Now, before I add a role to a cluster, I need to make sure that that role is installed on every member of the cluster, which is FOC1 and FOC2. So we're going to add the file service role to the cluster. So I needed to make sure that I installed file server role on FOC1 and FOC2, just like we did for the DHCP server. We installed it on both FOC1 and FOC2, and then we installed it in the cluster and then configured it in the cluster. So now that the file server roles is installed on both cluster members, I'm going to right-click roles inside of Failover Cluster Manager and say Configure Roles. Click Next, and I'm going to choose the file server role. Now we have two types of file servers for general use and scale out file servers for application data. You will get a lot of questions on the Microsoft certification about these two roles, about these two file servers. I'm going to talk about scale out file servers first. This option provides storage for server applications or virtual machines that leave files open for extended period of time. So if you have some application that needs to keep that network share open all the time, normally when you go to a network share, you connect to it, you do something to a document, you disconnect from it. But if you have this application that's hitting a file server all the time, then at that point, you don't want to use this option. If you have a service that needs NFS support, you don't use this. If you have a service that needs Dfs Replication, you don't use this. Or File Server Resource Manager. This File Server Resource Manager can do things like file screen. Let's say your corporation has a policy saying, do not save any personal pictures on your network share. But because your network share is private, the network admin can't find out if you're saving pictures or not. So the best way to do that is prevent users from saving the pictures. And what you can do is use the File Server Resource Manager to find something called a file screen, meaning they can't save pictures on the network share. So that's how you can enforce your policy of saving no pictures on the network share, is by not allowing them to save the pictures. You should also configure quotas. Like you can give each user 10 gig, and so some user doesn't use too much data where other users won't have any disk space. So what you can do is set up a quota so each user only has 10 gigs. So if you need like a file screen or a disk quota or DFS or NFS, do not use this option. This is strictly for those applications that keep file servers that keeps files open for extended periods of time. And their example is like a virtual machine. So if you're reading a question and they say they need to set up disk quotas, you know not to choose this option. If you're reading a question that talks about Dfs replication, and I'll explain what this is, and you'll get to this in another class, distributed file system. Basically, you have multiple servers serving up the same network share. And when you save a file to one network server, it replicates it to another network server. So if one server goes down, the other one will take the load. So if you need something like that, you don't choose this option. So I'm just going to choose this option. It supports data duplication. It supports data duplication is a process where once a day you can scan your network shares and look for exact copies of multiple files. So if one person has a Word document saved on their network share, and then another person has that same exact document, it's just using up resources that really doesn't need to be used. So you can enable data duplication so it only keeps one copy of the file and has two pointers to that file. So you can save a lot of disk space. So this port supports SMB, which is a normal network share, NFS, which is a Unix type network share. It supports data duplication, File Server Resource Manager, which is file screens and disk quotas, Dfs replication, and other file server roles. This is very limited to what it can do. Applications that keep network shares open for a long time. So I'm going to click Next for File Server for general use. I'm going to name the share, I'm just going to call it data. It's going to have an IP address of 152. No, actually, I'm just going to call it file server. Has an IP address of 152. I can't do this because I don't have any additional free storage. So what do we have to do to solve this? So before I can install a service, I need to install a disk on iSCSI and share it on the network. I should have done this first, but I forgot. So I'm going to click cancel. I'm going to go to the iSCSI server. Sorry, that noise in the background is my fish tank. Sorry, I'm waiting for this to come up. I'm going to go to File and Storage Services. iSCSI. I'm going to pause the video for 1 second. I'm going to click on Task, New iSCSI Virtual Disk. I have 14 gigs free. I'm just going to call this FS for lack of a better name. It's a disk for the file service. Click Next. I'm just going to make it 5 gigs to get through this lab. I'm going to use my existing target that we created when we did our witness disk. I'm going to click create. Then close. Now, just like our other disk, we have to go to our FOC1. We could wait a little bit before we did this, but I want to rush it. This should happen automatically, but I'm just going to rush it. I'm going to tell my iSCSI initiator to go find that new disk. So I'm going to go to Volume and Devices and Auto Configure. And there I found the new disk. I can see I have 4 disks now. I'm going to click OK. Then after we mounted the disk, we got to create a format. So I'm going to go to Disk Management. I'm going to look for the disk that's offline. It's right here. So I'm going to bring it online. I'm going to initialize the disk as NVR because it's a Gen 1 machine. But as long as it's not the boot disk, I could use a GPT partition. I'm going to say a new simple volume. Now again, I was right-clicking here to create the volume, not over here. New simple volume. I'm going to give it a label of FS. So I installed the file server roles on both Failover cluster members. I created a disk on my iSCSI server, shared it with both machines, both FOC1 and FOC2. My target was already created. I went to one machine, refreshed the iSCSI server, mounted the disk, formatted it. Now I'm just going to go onto FOC2 and make sure FOC2 is aware that there's a new disk. I'm going to go to Tools, iSCSI Initiator, Volumes and Devices, and just Auto Config. So it's aware that there's 4 disks. So now I'm going back to FOC1. Now I'm ready to add the file server role to the cluster. So I'm going to right click, Roles, Configure Role, press cancel. I forgot another step. I need to add the disk to the cluster. So I'm going to go to Disk, Add a disk. There's only one there. That's my 5 gigabit disk. Click OK. So the disk has been added and it's available to use for a service. So we're going to go to add a role. Finally. Click Next. We're going to choose File Server. We're going to do File Server for general use. We're going to call it FS and give it an IP address of 152. Let me see something real quick. I'll go back to my DC. I'm going to go to Active Directory Users and Computers. Highlight Computers. I'm going to refresh it. When I walk through the wizard the first time, it created that FS, so I'm going to delete it. So once I've deleted it, I'm going to go back to FOC1 and try again. I click back, then next. I'm going to use that disk that we mounted, which is 5 gigs big. Next. Then finish. I'm not sure the name will work just yet because not everything's replicated. So here's my network share. I don't have any permissions set or anything like that, but it's ready to use. If I highlight it, I can go down here to the bottom and I can see my network share. If I go to properties, this is an ACE-IT thing. I'm just going to go to FOC2, then go back to FOC1. Yeah, so yeah, I'm getting another issue here. And I'll kind of explain it. When I'm hosting these disks here, what I'm doing is I'm storing these disks, which are VHDs, on a VHD because this is a virtual machine. If we were in the classroom, I would actually have you store these disks on a physical disk, not a virtual disk. When I start putting virtual disk on virtual disk and sharing them in iSCSI, I get weird things to happen like this. For right now, the purpose of this lab is to kind of show you how to set up a file server on a failover cluster. We walk through the motions of setting up the disk on the iSCSI, but again, it's not really working right because you're not supposed to host an iSCSI virtual disk on a virtual disk. Okay, but you should get the general idea how to configure and play around with the cluster. Okay, guys, this is the last lab for this class. We've done installations with WDS. We've done file server roles on an independent machine. We played around with iSCSI. We created answer files. We did failover manager, created failover manager, created failover clusters. And we also created an NLB cluster. So we got a lot done in this class. It wasn't a perfect setup using ACE-IT. Really, clusters should be set up on physical machines, but you should get the gist of what we're trying to do. Okay, so this is the last class. Guys, I'm going to post this on the D2L, and once you're done with all the labs, send me an email so I can review that all the labs are done. At that point, I will mark your final grade as your final skills exam as a 100. If you have questions, you know how to reach me. A lot of students have been contacting me. They need help with labs and stuff like that. I try to respond very quickly. So, good luck with everything and have a good summer. Thank you.